Hi everyone, this is Javier Milei, founder of the GGV podcast. Today we have a special guest, one of my great friends, as a matter of fact. His name is Nicolas Tartaglia. He's Canadian from Montreal, and he published his book Millennial Economics with GGV Publishing. Nicolas, welcome to the
Correct.
GGV Publishing podcast.
Hey, Germinal. It feels good to be on this side, since we've had you two times on our podcast. So, it feels nice to be on the other side of the equation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember the first time we had a podcast together was I was on the other side of the equation. It was you and Dan interviewing me on economics and econometrics. And I remember you guys interviewed me twice.
Yeah.
And then since then the podcast has been growing. You guys have like
Hmm.
very influential people on your platform. Honestly, congratulations for that, man. This
Thanks.
is this is big. So, Nicholas, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience? So, what leads you to writing in general?
So, um, I didn't take the traditional route to get into finance. I just happened to well, I say finance because that's sort of how I found myself in this ecosystem. But naturally, it led me to kind of this obsession with economics because you kind of start seeing how through financial markets, there's some sort of behavioral component to it. And then that's kind of when I went down the rabbit hole of economics. So to just give it a wrap up, I have an accounting degree from university, but never really cared for that degree or to do anything with accounting. I just wanted the degree because, the world says these degrees are important. So that's what I did. But I fell in love with finance and investing in financial markets and kind of observing, especially from a macro lens, fundamental analysis. How's the world shaping? How are markets shaping? What are theses that you could build within the financial system to kind of align your allocation of capital? So started doing that. Started being invited to these private investment suppers here in Montreal with these older guys who have a vast network of small cap relationships. So basically, companies on the CSC. So in Canada, we have three exchanges. We have the lower, it's the CSC, the Canadian Security Exchange. We have the venture, and then we have the Toronto Stock Exchange. So the group of gentlemen I started participating with in these lunches was basically heavily connected with the CSC and the venture. So these are companies that want to kind of develop relationships and meet investors and share their story in person because the in-person component does not have the same effect as an online presence. You can't build relationships that way. And sometimes it's nice to meet people, meet CEOs, and really get the story directly from them so you can make your own assessment rather than just read something on a piece of paper on the internet. So I started doing that. And I was obviously the only kid there. And that's when I met my partner, Dan. So this was late 2019, right before the whole world kind of went into this phase of insanity and shut down. And we decided to start a podcast together because it was rare to see two kids that just really loved financial markets and to analyze them. So we started what's now called NewGen Mindset Podcast, which has now converted, it's still a podcast, but now we've allowed that to kind of channel our energy to building communities, relationships, and seeking opportunities. So now we host events here in Montreal for investors and companies, and we go to a lot of, especially mining for now, but we love to expand that to others. We go to a lot of events. So we go to like PDAC, which is one of the largest mining events in the world. We'll be guest speakers, hosting a panel about how to tell a story to the lost generation because the mining space is so disconnected from the older generation. And to basically go on with this, because of the podcast, it's allowed me to discuss and have conversations with so many incredible people like yourself, and the list goes on and on. And that was kind of our purpose, was we just love to talk with people. And it's odd how people don't realize that through conversation you can learn so many things about this world because you get a sliver of the world's perspective, and then through that mechanism of kind of putting pieces together, you could kind of holistically create this own internal visualization of what is the world and how does it behave. Um, so I've had a blast doing that. And basically, because here in where I live in Quebec, we went through like lockdowns and curfew. I was almost 2 years locked in my house. So I didn't really get to do much going outside. So I went through this kind of crisis where it's like I can't allow my time to be thrown away where all I do is watch TV because I can't leave the house. So I decided to go down this academic journey and start of reading, listening, watching, discussing subjects that were beyond what I typically did. So this is where I went down a lot of economic holes. And my obsession with financial markets and observing them from a behavioral lens kind of oddly intertwined with these theories and this learning curve that I had kind of incorporated in economics. So then I started listening to like basically the people I really listened to was Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, Walter E. Williams, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek, um, Frédéric Bastiat, Voltaire. These were some really of my obsessive people, and then obviously Stoicism too, because I find Stoicism is heavily correlated to free market philosophy, just from a
This is a very interesting
philosophical.
point. Yeah, this is a very interesting point you're mentioning here.
Correct.
We
So
will dive deep into that in a second.
exactly. So that's it. So just to kind of finish that up, I went down that role, and then I started that hole there of economics. And I wrote my first book. My first book was more of a manifesto thought piece where I was trying to first finally try to just question and structure things that I never thought I would do in my life. And then that led me to writing my second book, which is Millennial Economics, where I'm more proud of it because it's much more structured and it's much more about developing theory and a lens into the world from a behavior from an economic lens. And then and then I got published with you, and then I just I've been having a blast ever since. So I kind of see myself now as like a street academic in economics, who's obsessed with financial markets and loves to invest. So that's kind of like a long, short little summary of what I do and who I am.
Awesome. Well, I think you and I are very similar in terms of street academics because, in fact,
Hmm.
what we do is that we commercialize our intellect. We realize that there is no need to get a doctorate
Correct.
if you can use your knowledge, whatever you know, and spread it out to a massive amount of people. In fact, I think it's more effective that way. What we do is that we are more concerned with spreading or proliferate our ideas with a general audience than a scientific audience. Because that's the thing with the doctor of the PhD is that
Hmm.
your audience is scientific.
Correct.
And it's all about, personally, I think it's all about ego. Uh,
Correct. I agree. I agree. It's a competition among who who is like it's weird. From an institutional standpoint, it just seems more of like a how can I say this? A battle of egos. It's not really about what information can really share because they have an interest that their information leads to funding and this and that. So there's this competition for that. Whereas us is you do you, I'll do me. I'm going to build my theory. You build your theory. You do your work. I'll do my work. Whatever idea survives, survives. And from that on, we just try to build on top of that and share and just try to absorb whatever is most relevant. And the other thing I think is institutions is back in the day, they were the only ones that had really access to information, whereas now we have access to it on the internet.
yeah,
So people have the ability to kind of build their own academic journey on their own and are
yeah,
not dependent on some educational construct.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I had a really fantastic podcast with a Québécois uh with I mean they're from Quebec and they
Oh, no way.
because yeah,
Okay.
and it was in French actually.
Oh,
And one of
nice.
the hosts is a professor of
Hmm.
economics at George Mason. He's quite Austrian, but he studied economic history. His name is Dr. Vincent Geloso.
Okay.
And he always wanted me to do a PhD. And I
Hmm.
was like, honestly, I'd rather be rich than do a PhD. I'm like,
Uh,
because first of all, like you and I, we're people who say what we think.
mhm.
And being in a academic settings would be bad because we get fired or
Correct.
we never
Correct.
get tenured because
Correct.
you don't subscribe to the general dogma and they're going to apply that DEI on you like, or we want diversity of skin color and culture but we
Well,
don't want
I
diversity
feel
of
like I'm
thought.
at a disadvantage more than you in that scenario.
No, but honestly, like, no, but honestly, your books,
No,
and
no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah.
and we dive into your book, but your books are very, they're not just interesting, they're very deep, they're profound. very theoretical, and it's important to emphasize on the theory, because the theory is what actually leads to the practice. I mean, you know my stance on theory. Don't get
Mhm.
me wrong. I
Correct, correct,
understand
correct.
the purpose why theory is crucial, because what's the point to do all sort of data analysis without a solid theoretical framework to
Mhm.
back that data analysis? You're right.
It's
Because
the
data
why. I
analysis
feel like the theoretical is why am I going to pursue this type of understanding?
absolutely.
Or it's the like, why am I trying to analyze this? Because this theoretical construct seems to answer these type of questions.
Yeah,
Now, can we analyze the market in real time and its past to kind of validate this conclusion or this thesis?
absolutely. Now let me ask you this, right? You specialize in behavioral economics. Why do you think that it is better to assess behavior rather than using statistical analysis to make predictions, not just about markets, but
Mhm.
about economic trends in general?
Sure. So my take on this is because from a financial lens, when I'm trying, well, the origins of my framework starts from the fact that if I am going to be a macro and a fundamental investor looking forward, my biggest indication as to what is going to happen in the future is based on a dynamic component of the market, which is human behavior. Now, most data points are looking backwards. They don't look forward. You could say up until this point in time, everything has been fantastic. This, that. Okay, the data backs it. But as if this point in time moving forward, I am now depressed. But in this moment of time, you cannot quantify the consequence of a society that's depressed or an individual that's depressed moving forward, because all the data you have in the moment tells you an entirely different story. So the dynamic shift in my behavior and my emotion has not yet been told in any of your data. So for me, behavior is a lens into the future. So a lot of time, and also the thing is, when we do a lot of studies and we collect data, we don't necessarily quantify, so we don't properly quantify socioeconomic metrics. How collaborative is a culture? We don't really have this component. We can kind of break up all these variables to try to quantify that reality. But for me, it's behavior reflects the outcome of society. So if we're less collaborative, we will be less prosperous. And then this is where I can then quantify using different metrics to say, well, is there more war? Is there more domestic political conflict? Are people fighting more and more over certain topics? Do people want to work together? Do people divisive? For me, it's really that is the predictive nature of markets is for me is done through a behavioral lens because I can better analyze what governments are doing, what cultures are doing, and how culture and how economies are shifting because it's a reflection of human behavior. And numbers end up merely quantifying behaviors of humans.
Absolutely. I think you are actually spot on this. Analyzing behavior, specifically analyzing patterns. I think if you're able to discern patterns, you can pretty much predict anything, because I believe that human beings follow patterns,
Correct.
incentive. When someone has follows a pattern, regardless of what that thing is, you can tell what the
Mhm.
outcome will be. And that's where I think behavioral economics perfectly makes sense. And especially in financial markets, because when you look at the way markets react, it's all about psychology. It's
Correct.
all about behavior. I'm a strong proponent of the quantitative approach,
Of
but
course.
I think that even in order to use even if you use the quantitative approach, there are certain factors that the quantitative approach cannot grasp. And that's where you're absolutely right, is that the quantitative approach, when you use data to try to predict in the future, you're looking at past something that has already happened. And the shift in the behavior has not been accounted for in
Correct.
in the data. And this is something that no scientist can
Correct.
ever can ever take into consideration at the moment they're doing their
Precisely.
analysis. And this is very true. and how behavioral economics now links to Austrian economics, because you're a proponent of Austrian economics. Personally, I think most of our audience may not necessarily be familiar with Austrian economics, but personally, I think the link is totally correlated. It's the logical following, like it follows logically why, as a proponent of behavioral economics, you logically move toward the Austrian school, specifically if you believe in the liberalization of markets. But can you explain to our audience what is the
Sure.
link between the two?
So for me, it's I believe it's more heavily rooted in the philosophy of Austrian economics, because obviously Austrians, they have their own way of quantifying and, using numbers and equations to kind of support some sort of economic models for certain things. For me, it's more philosophically in the sense that Austrian economics heavily believes in the natural component of the market. It believes that and it heavily ties into Stoicism, is that it's up to individuals to bend the knee to nature rather than trying to make nature bend the knee to us humans. For Austrian economics removes the component of the self-ego. We are nothing part of a nature. Economies pre-exist any human construct because it just is part of nature. So the point of Austrian economics is, how do we humans bend the knee to its will and its power to make it work for us, to ensure that individuals and collectives both could prosper in a way that's beneficial for all and individuals. It defies the collective construct that says that, well, we must operate as a collective unit with a central authority, and this central authority is the one that provides the economy in which you must then operate with. But they, by de facto, are the God. In this scenario, no, nature is God. We bend the knee to nature. Nature has its realities, and we must understand those realities to incorporate it into our economic constructs. So it ties a lot into objectivism, rationale, stoicism, free market philosophy. And this is why I think a lot of the guys like Hayek, Ludwig, Thomas, Milton, Walter E. Williams, and list goes on, all of these guys, but it's obviously not just within the Austrian, their philosophy of markets heavily connects to the Enlightenment period, heavily connects to the principles of why the Magna Carta was created back in the 14th century, ties into Stoicism with Plato and Cato and all those guys, because it's a philosophical perspective that the world is an economic world and we are merely agents in an economic game. We simply want to understand the game and abide by those rules. Men do not make the rules of economics. Nature created them. We just want to make it work for us as individuals.
So would you say in this day and age, in this world we are currently living, we are trying to, so if I understand correctly what you're saying, we are trying to make nature bend to our will instead of
Correct.
us bending to nature? And
Correct.
I think you're absolutely right, because when you look at, and this comes to, I'm actually going to expand on your point here.
Yeah, go.
This point, this comes, it boils down to social construct. When you look at, for example, from on the cultural or the social aspect of things, when someone says who was born a male says that he's a woman, and vice versa, they are trying, when you were born a male, that's nature. And then you are
Correct.
trying to change that social, because you think that, oh, it's a social construct. You can change your will at whatever you want. It's like me saying, you know what, I'm Japanese.
Correct.
Although I'm not Japanese, I don't speak Japanese. I don't have Japanese culture. I can say I'm Japanese because that's what I believe in my head that I am. But
Correct.
the nature of things is that Japanese people behave a certain way that I am absolutely not accustomed to, right? It's like you saying that you are from Uganda, although you may not know about Ugandan culture. So you're
Absolutely.
not Uganda at all, right? Or even Italian. Yes, you may have an Italian last name, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily culturally Italian,
Culturally
right?
correct.
So it all depends on it all depends on your nature, and the
Your
thing is that we,
environment and yeah.
yeah, the requirement, and the thing is that we are trying to reverse, when you're trying to make nature work for us instead of us working, accommodating ourselves toward nature. And when we accommodate ourselves toward nature, it makes things much easier.
Correct.
It makes
I
the
agree.
adaptation and evolution much easier than us
Correct.
trying to work up nature. It's pretty much social engineering.
I find you're more stable. The premise of sustainability and finding balance with our reality, which exists in a natural world, it's much more probable and likely because we are in balance. Our frequency matches the frequency of nature.
Yeah.
By that reasoning, there's a point of equilibrium between us. When we allow the mind, so this is where I talk in my book about the concept of the mind and its capacity to go beyond the realm of scarcity, because we can infinitely dream things up in our mind and design all kinds of social constructs and imagine all kinds of social things. But the mind has to find a point of equilibrium with nature and understand that nature that we humans exist within abides by certain set of constraints that pre-exist anything we want to imagine. Nature created our brain, which we use to imagine all these things. So if we don't bend to nature and we don't respect it, our mind is going to create all these imaginary things, and then we are going to not only disrupt our life and cause chaos for it, we will then also do it as a collective and centrally disrupt their collective and cause chaos for society.
So your approach is actually an approach of humility. It's the constrained vision that Thomas Sowell talked about in A Conflict of Vision and Vision of the Anointed, is that nature knows more than I do.
Correct.
The market knows more than I do. So it's my role or it's my duty to bend to it rather than trying to manufacture it and work in my way. The
Correct.
unconstrained vision, on the other hand, the one you're criticizing, is in fact a vision of arrogance,
I
right?
agree.
You
Absolutely.
that you alone, because God created you to his image, therefore you use that power to try to work things your way and bend your will on everything else. This is amazing.
I correlated that to before Galileo said to everybody, to society, that the planet Earth is not the center of the universe, of the solar system, it's the sun. So when it comes to economics, we have the same comprehension. We assume that the economy and everything bends to us and we are somehow this central point to a global economy. No, the economy already exists. We are within it. We are not the center of the economy. We are merely components and agents within a game, because nature plays economics, animals play economics. But somehow we've assumed that only we are and that nature is bending around us. And then Galileo was punished for this understanding. And today the same thing. People always say, "Well, without government, without this, how is there an economy?" The economy exists with or without them. If I have to go get food and I have to drink water in a lake or I have to hunt an animal, I am playing an economic game. I don't need a god for that. Or I don't, sorry, I don't need I said God in that sense because a lot of people treat government as though they are
Yeah, yeah,
gods
I see what you
because they
say.
can create this construct. But
Yeah.
no, it's not them. This already existed for thousands and thousands for millennials, for millions of years before any construct of a centralized government came to be.
Can you actually expound on primal economics and what is
Yes.
the antithesis of primal economics? Because you use that a lot in your books, even on your Instagram posts.
Hmm.
It's literally the core. It's kind of like a brand. I think you should even like trademark that primal economics. But can you explain to our
Of
audience
course. So
what it means?
basically, how I say is the natural component of most of the entire nature almost abides by primal dynamics in the sense that in order to thrive, some sort of physiological domination is required. If I'm a hunter, I must hunt an animal, kill it so I can eat it. For me to sustain my existence, I must apply primal dynamics, the hunting, the domination, using my physiological resources, my body, my mind, my hands, designing tools to go about hunting another animal to sustain myself. So the primal component is just basically where we come from as organisms on this human earth.
Nature.
Nature By default, almost all organisms apply primal economics. The thing about humans and the thing about the most interesting of social organisms like packs of animals or this, that, is that they've realized that by using collaborative economics, so let's deviate away from the primal component of always being in conflict. Let's work together so that we can, individuals and collectives, prosper as a unit. So this is where you see humans, for example, the moment we decided to collaborate and work together, you now see a trend of humanity starting to prosper. Let's work together. You build a house, I'll farm. Build me a home and I'll feed you. That is a collaborative effort that leads to both parties prospering collectively.
In
So for
fact,
me,
sorry,
go,
I
go,
wanted
go,
to
go,
add
go.
something very interesting to what you said about the collaborative aspect of economics. When you look at even animals, when you look at
Yes,
African dogs, they actually, when they go hunting, it's collaborative economics,
correct.
right? They clearly strategize, and the way, if you notice, like they never kill the prey before they eat it. They eat it on the spot because they think that
Correct.
they're,
It's just easier. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, stronger predators that can take the food away. But the point is to say that when they collaborate, when they strategize on how to catch the prey, they're actually more prosperous,
Mm-hmm.
much more efficient. This is, I wanted to add that because it's
Yes, absolutely.
actually,
So it's interesting because among themselves, they will apply collaborative economics. But outside of their collective group, they will then use primal economics.
yeah.
As a collective unit, they will hunt another animal and kill it.
Mhm.
Pro- Prosperity is a derivative of collaboration. Nature is always in perpetual chaos. It's hard to build and develop a family unit and build a society in nature if you don't use collaborative principles because you're always in constant conflict. It is hard to trust someone that is a primal agent because you might kill me tomorrow. You might steal my things tomorrow. You might be building up these partnerships around me behind my back and end up taking me down. You might plunder. You might steal. You might rape and kill my family. Those Most of humanity and most of the ways that civilizations built themselves and thrived on a global scale were all a result of primal economics. Humanity has never escaped this construct, and our weakest form as humans exists when we are primal. When we are collaborative is when we are strongest and we are most sustainable and we are most at balance with our nature and balanced among themselves.
um, this you explained really well the difference between primal and collaborative economics. And now I want you to dig more into Keynesian economics and government intervention. Uh, do you see Keynesian economics and government intervention as primal economics?
Yes,
Why is that?
because the very premise of its existence depends on manipulation, lies, coercion. It takes from you without a voluntary system. If I choose to voluntarily exchange your service for my goods, for my resources, we now have a collaborative spirit. But the very essence of the state, which is supposed to exist on the premise of servitude to protect my resources, protect my property, and so on and such on, exists on a coercive premise, not on a collaborative premise. So by default, you are a primal entity. You are not a collaborative entity because if I do not partake in this game, you will penalize me, even though I have done no harm to nobody. So your premise, your very existence is derived from primal principles. So the government is a primal entity that thrives off this ego. And then for it to do what it does through Keynesian principles, which is the central authority is sitting in a car and has all the tools and this machine come play with all these buttons or the steering wheel is requires a central authority to be able to use its primal component of coercion to take resources from the marketplace, centralize it, and then based on its whims and its desires, will allocate resources according to what it wants. But that comes at the cost of its people that didn't voluntarily give it to you. So this is why I'm against Keynesian principles. I'm against the government. And I argue that Keynesian directly leads to socialism, communism, because it's based on a centralized framework. The government is the one to manipulate, dictate, intervene, subsidize. But by default, governments always have to protect its own actions because they are the resource of the people. So it has to always guarantee its outcome. And the only way to guarantee something in a game without a collaborative spirit is by using force. Oh, if you don't do this, so you start implementing more regulations, you start implementing more laws, you start penalizing people, you start throwing people in jail, you start providing sanctions, because all those variables in the marketplace become a threat to the resources that the government has allocated. And if it loses those resources, now all the people lose confidence. So it has to maintain this mirage, this illusion. But this illusion is all based on lies and it's based on primal principles. There's no
Does it
collaborative spirit.
does it mean that we gotta get rid of government completely? You don't see any role
No.
of government at all?
I argue that the use of government as a word should be changed because there's this massive debate. And I feel that if we were to alter the meaning or alter the word of government, I feel we can have this a better discussion with a general population. I don't like the word government because by default it means to govern, and nobody's going to govern me. If I believe in the liberalist principles or the classical liberalist principles of what a government serves, then I would argue I accept that and I believe that's true. But I think the word government should not apply. It should be a different word because
So
in
what word
reality,
do you
it's
have in
not
mind?
govern. I don't know. This is for more discussion and more debate for the community and for humanity. But the word govern is misleading in the classical sense because it's to govern is not to lead. To govern is not to be an example. To govern is just to dictate and to control and to tell what to do. So this is why I don't like the word government in the sense of a classical principles. I do believe that we need some sort of system that allows us to have access to the judicial system. I believe in a system that, or not necessarily a system, or in a community effort, or where you have people that are there to protect your resources, to protect the border. But those things don't require a government because they're not governing us. They are there to protect resources. So this is where I come in with this idea that I think the word government should be replaced with some other word just so that we could bridge like the more classical liberals and the libertarians with the premise of a state or some sort of central system that allows these protections.
So does it mean that that might be the topic of another book that you
It could absolutely be
right?
another one.
Yeah.
It's just it's hard to quantify it. It's more of I'm pursuing more discussion on that just to see what people think about it and what people want to do with that or what their heads are at. Like even the word capitalism for me, I think that the word capitalism has become so tabooed and dirtied by so many cultures and people and these delusional philosophies that the word capitalism should be altered to something else to kind of rein people back in, say, and allow people to throw out the old word and be more open to a discussion of a construct that is basically capitalism, just with another word.
Yeah, I think maybe you know like the change for the word capitalism normally is free market. I think if we use the
Correct.
word free market or a market economy, people will be more
More
appeased,
open.
right?
Correct.
Because at the end of the day, the word capitalism was invented by Marx to criticize,
Correct.
to demean capitalism. And there's a book that GGV Publishing will be releasing that I wrote that the company
Mm-hmm.
will be releasing next month in February, and it's about the credit system. It's an
Mm.
exposure to monetary policy to the average person, because monetary policy, and we will talk about that in the second part of this interview. Monetary policy is a pretty complex topic on its own. It's technical on its own. So what I try to do in the book is to, I don't want to use the word dumb me down, but I try to synthesize and simplify so that the average person understands why we are kind of doomed. And I use the Austrian approach for that
Mm. And I
because
appreciate this, just to continue to say this, I appreciate it because what I think people don't realize is that in the academic circle, they don't create content or write things for the general population. They write it for themselves.
yeah,
Whereas me and you, and the way we go about our work is we're trying to disperse these ideas and this knowledge to a general population.
yeah,
So we're trying to bring things down to a level where we know we can transmit the information to others. Whereas they don't care about that because
yeah,
they want to remain the circle of the intellectual and
yeah,
keep everybody out of that circle.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And in this book, that's what I'm trying to do. So when the book will be released, for anyone that will read, there's no, I mean, they're charged, but No econometrics, nothing. The charts are
Hmm.
used, in fact, as evidence to examples, to back my point, because it's pretty much a theoretical book in the sense that I'm explaining the causes of the reasons
Cause and
why,
effects.
yeah,
Yeah.
cause and effect, as a reason why we're in this situation. So that's what the book is about, and it will be released in 2 to 3 weeks,
Nice.
pretty
Another one
much.
to your another what number? Which book is that now? Number
It
what?
This book, it's called Understanding the Credit System.
Mm-hmm.
No, the
And it'll be
credit
the what
economy.
number? It'll be number what? 23,
Number
24?
27.
27.
Number
You're a
27.
robot. You're a robot when you write.
No,
It's
but I'm
crazy.
I'm 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 just really passionate about,
Of course, but that's
yeah,
that's why it's fun that it's this is why I enjoy the street academic
yeah,
ecosystem rather than the intellectual one because it's not you can't you're putting in work for the institution, not for yourself, you
exactly.
know. So,
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely, man. But we will come back to the second part of this interview. Stay tuned.
so.
And we are back for the second part of this interview. Nick, welcome back. Um,
Nice.
I want to talk to you a little bit about monetary policy. Do you think we need a central bank? And what is your assessment of central banking in general?
So I see like obviously a lot of people. The first thing I'll say is this: a lot of people like to argue that central banks are independent, but I will argue that you can't argue that if you know that central banks always basically act in a way to ensure government actions. So if everything they do is to intervene when government makes stupid mistakes, well, then the government knows that it's not independent and that it'll always do something in order to protect the actions of the government in the marketplace, like closing the economy and then they collapse rates. Well, if you had never closed the economy, you would have never had to collapse the rates, bait a bunch of people into buying homes at increased prices with low rates. And now, like for example, in Canada, where people have 5-year fixed terms, if rates stay high, they might end up having to pay double or triple the interest costs on their home, and some of them might not be able to afford it. But that was a liquidity trap induced by the bank, central bank, protecting the actions of the government. So I heavily believe that governments and banks are heavily intertwined, central banks. So I don't believe in the construct of a central bank because this is only needed if you have a collective centralized construct. And it's also the dream of Karl Marx and all these collective groups because it allows them direct access to the money supply and to kind of play with it as needed be to do the activity needed in the marketplace. I believe in more local banks and community banks that serve the needs of specific areas and specific communities rather than a central bank that serves the purpose of a collective centralized system.
Absolutely. And but why, for example, if you tell the average Canadian, even the more classical liberal American and Canadians, right, who support Javier Milei. We'll talk about Javier Milei in a bit too. I want to have a deep opinion of yours on him. But if Javier, they support Javier Milei because he's a libertarian. He said he will slash government spending, cut
Correct.
government uh, size, and all of that. And he says he will dismantle the Argentinian central bank, and everyone praised him for that. But if someone used that same rhetoric in the US or in Canada and say they're going to dismantle the Canadian central bank or the US Federal Reserve, suddenly people freak out. They're like, oh, no way, no. How the economy is going to function? That's the first question they ask. Why do you think is that? Why the willing to praise Milei for dismantling the Argentinian central bank, and when it comes to the same situation in the US and Canada, people are are literally afraid.
Because I think it if they do it here in the West, it now puts their own assets and their own wealth at risk. Because if we were to play that game, there would be short-term consequences. And a lot of people are exposed to the central banking construct, the centralized construct. So if we were to go in and play this game, the question becomes, what is the outcome of the wealth? What is the outcome of our resources? What is the outcome of our assets? So a lot of people would be exposed to this data, to this action. Now the question becomes, are we in this for the long term to help our children and their children? Or are we in this for ourselves and to protect our own wealth? So if you're looking as purely as an individualist with no sense of notion of culture or people around you and wanting to kind of protect your kids and your friends and family, and you don't want to kind of partake in a sustainable construct, then the notion of dismantling the central system doesn't benefit you because you're kind of putting all your wealth at risk because you're going to reset a lot of things the moment you dispose of a central bank because the system was built on that. So a
Mm.
lot of things will become unknown. And a lot of people are afraid of that unknown, I think. And fear is what's inhibiting us. This is why we always go, let's kick the can down the road. Let's kick the can down the road. But eventually you can't kick it any further. And now you've destroyed so many things and you've punished not only yourself, but your children, your children's children, your friends, your family, and everybody around you. So I think that there's a fear component that it involves them. Over there, it's an experience that they can observe, that they can watch, but it doesn't affect them. Whereas
That's why.
here, their wealth is entirely exposed. And a lot of people are exposed because they have a lot of debt, they have mortgages, they have all these things. So if all the debt collapses and you have a lot of debt in the system, you become entirely at risk because all your wealth was tied to the debt. So I
Mm.
think it's more of an exposure variable that people are here exposed to those consequences. Where over there in Argentina, regardless of what happens, it has no real global consequence.
That's why.
But America and Canada, there's a massive consequence to the entire global economy because it's one of the most powerful economies in the world. So if you play this game, everything becomes unknown. What happens after? But the issue is most people have not de-risked themselves from the system to mitigate that possibility. And this is why I advocate for things like gold, and being your own investor and understanding why you shouldn't have all your capital in a bank and your bank's ETFs and institutions, and you become your own investor. Because from a sovereignty standpoint, if you understand how to manage your own finances and you understand how to take care of your own allocation, you are not exposed to those dangers because you can now make better decisions for yourself. You can leverage yourself. You can mitigate them. You can buy some gold stored away. You could buy Bitcoin, hold it on the internet. You could do all these things. But two people are too connected to the centralized system. So it exposes them and it's dangerous for them, I think. And they fear that.
I think you're absolutely right. I didn't see it that way at first. I thought about it before, but the explanation you gave here answers answers some of the questions that I was looking for. Because to me, the way I saw was like people are just accustomed to having a central authority making choices for them. So they
Correct.
cannot imagine
Yes.
uh life and the system
Outside of
going
that.
on without that was the explanation I had. But what you
But
just
it ties into that because
yeah.
without the central bank, so like if you look at Canadian housing market, for example, okay, so housing in North America or in the West in general is a huge component of the wealth. If you look at the central banks for the last 20 years, all you see is interest rates going down, 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 down,
I
and
have a problem.
you see housing
Mhm.
price going up. So a
Yeah.
lot of our wealth is heavily tied to the manipulation of central banks.
Yeah. No, yeah, I was about to say like I think to me it's extremely misleading for people to use their house as the source of their wealth.
Absolutely.
I understand why they do it, but it doesn't make sense. Let me explain what I mean here.
Go.
Um, like in the American system, even the Canadian system, when we talk about the American dream and stuff like that, people think that the American dream is home ownership. but it's not home ownership. At least if you want to use real estate to build wealth, make sure that the real estate you're buying is something that will bring money in your pocket. Most people buy homes, they live in it. I believe the reason why they call it the American dream was because maybe one day they're gonna sell it. That's the only reason why.
Hmm.
Because if you plan on never selling the house you're living in, you should not even count that as part of your net worth when
Correct.
you calculate your net. And a lot of people, that's what they
Do.
do when they calculate the net worth. They include housing.
For a lot of people, it's the only wealth they can conclude because it's the only mechanism for them to take their extra money and put it into their house. It's the only mechanism they have.
Yeah. Although the way to actually build wealth, as I said, is always business ownership. The reason why, and this is something that even like for people who invest in financial markets, I always say this: whether you invest in stocks,
Hmm.
bonds, even real estate, commodities, and cryptocurrencies, all of these are assets, or they're assets you do not have 100% control over.
Of course.
The only asset you have 100% control over is your business. Your
Mhm.
business, you get to decide the structure of the business or how you want to be taxed. You get to decide who is going to invest in your business. You get to control the cash flow.
Correct.
You have absolute control over your business. Even people who get wealthy from financial markets, they don't get wealthy from financial market from on their own. I've made a post about that a couple of days ago.
Hmm.
They create a business, then they use that business to invest in financial markets,
Hmm.
and then they reap the benefits from the financial market. Warren Buffett became a millionaire at age 30.
Hmm.
Although he's a very sophisticated investor, one of perhaps for me the greatest investor
One of
of
the
all
best.
time,
Hmm.
he became a millionaire because of Buffett partnership. He created a business that he used to invest in financial markets. He did not take his own money and put in the financial market and then got millions, on the way back. But it's something that I think people fail to realize is that if you believe in housing as the way to build wealth, and real estate is known to be among the surest investments to become wealthy, it has to be a productive asset, something that brings money into your pocket.
Let me add to that. I'll agree because at the same time, is if I buy a house and I don't, and that's my only mechanism of building my wealth, unless the government inflates my house away, I'm not going to become a millionaire or a billionaire because there's no one to inflate the home value.
Yeah,
So I'm not.
absolutely.
I have no way to really build wealth around that because I am entirely um tied to whatever banks and governments do with the economy. So if there's no inflation of prices in that way to play with that, then my house is dead. But if I generate a business, if I do this, I could generate cash flow. I have a way to create a sort of system by which there's a mechanism where resources are always coming my way and that I
Mhm.
can reallocate and build upon and do more with.
Absolutely. Oh, let me ask you this.
So I get that. I get where you come on with that.
Let me ask you this. Is your podcast an actual business structure, or you guys are more like
Yes.
informal?
No,
Okay.
so we've incorporated it only 2 months ago now. So
Okay.
we are now a business. We now focus on consulting in capital markets, consulting companies for how to tell a better story, our events. Basically, our premise is now we're trying to focus on building communities, building relationships, and building opportunities. And this is why we go to a lot of investment events. So I just came back from Vancouver for 5 days. I
Mhm.
was the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. You had Robert Kiyosaki. You had a bunch of guys from around the world that are brilliant macro guys that speak. And even though it's a mining conference around resources, the premise, a lot of it is around macroeconomics and how the world is shifting. And then it ties into precious metals, silver, gold. It ties into the need for commodities. So we are now officially a business, and we are now
Mhm.
trying to monetize the the brand and the
The brand,
relationships
yeah.
that we've built over the couple years.
So basically, now you created an asset for yourself because, as I always say, because when, for example, right, you ask a a W-2 employee, as we say here in the US, I'm sure you guys have a word for that in Canada, a salaried person. As we say,
Hmm.
most people, their wealth is tied to their house. So when you ask them, what is your most valuable asset? It's my house. But a business owner is his business. It's never his house because his
Correct.
business, the value of his business increase and there's no cap. There's no cap. And the
Correct.
day is tired of sell of
There's a greater
running.
multiplication factor in a business than
Absolutely.
there is in a home.
Absolutely. And the day he's tired of it, he can sell it. The same way the day you guys are tired of, or for whatever
Hmm.
reason, you're done with the podcast, you guys can sell it. And you and Dan, I assume on paper it's 50-50. You guys take
Hmm.
the check and that's it.
Correct.
So
Exactly.
I always say like the only way to really build wealth in the market economy is to create a business structure and use that business to generate revenue. And it
Correct.
helps you generate cash flow. That's
Yes, I
it.
agree. It's also the most sustainable way because it's easier to pass on. If you look at yourself purely from an income standpoint, I can exchange my labor for resources and income. Sure, no problem. And you can definitely build wealth if you save every dollar. Let's say, you make $500,000 a year, you save $250,000 every single year. Of course, you can build it, but that's for the extreme few percentage of this world. So,
Exactly.
so it's not really the traditional mechanism by which you can idealistically say, well, I'm going to take this route because it's very hard to get that to do it that way. And at the same time, like they can multiply that because they generate so much cash flow, they can take that and do so much with it.
Yeah.
So it's an outlier assessment. So in the way you speak is much more in a general sense.
Hmm.
What can the average person do? Start a home business. You live at home, you work online, no problem for a company. But at the same time, you're at home. Use your home space, start an online business, make some extra money, find a way to generate extra cash flow. The home should not be the place where you then sit on your ass and just watch TV. Leverage that to do more with yourself.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yes, I agree with you in the perspective you have, and I think a lot of people need to start reshaping the way they assess their wealth and how they assess their place within the world. Because, like you mentioned before, there's too many people that are heavily tied to third party intermediaries, and that puts everything at risk. What happens if there's a bank failure tomorrow?
Thank you.
You're not leveraging. Your bank is not giving you any digital dollars for your house. They don't care right now. They don't have the money to pay you out. Well,
Exactly.
you're useless. But your business, if I have a business and there's a bank failure, I could still collect silver coins. I could still collect gold coins because I can still operate in a real time. I just need to find the right people to do it.
Absolutely.
But that's just the thing is the way people go about building wealth is I think it's this illusion that was created by the government. So and
Yeah, you
how
have,
it anchors them into the economy, it gives them a debt, and then it creates a 30, 40, 50-year tax cattle for the state.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right on this. I want to have your opinion on Javier Milei.
Mm-hmm.
I, you and I, we've talked online about it.
Mm-hmm.
You've shown a lot of skepticism
Mm-hmm.
about, which is, I think it's fair because it shows your critical thinking. You're not in the euphoria of most libertarians who finally, I understand why they all exhilarating. They're like, oh, finally we have a
Of
libertarian.
course. And I
And
get that. A part of me is like, fuck yeah, like this is
yeah,
awesome. I get
yeah.
that, like I'm half of me is in that camp and the other half of me is Nick. The history teaches you nothing is that pretty and easy going. There's always something behind the door.
Basically, what's the catch, right? You're like, there's always a
Correct.
catch at some point. So
Correct. And
can you?
I can argue the catch. So this is what you're asking me, right?
Yes, exactly. So what's the catch
So,
about Javier Milei, according to you?
okay, so the first one I'll use is this. A couple years ago, the World Economic Forum, which is Carl Schwab, came out, which I call him the modern day Karl Marx. He came out a couple years ago and said libertarianism is the threat to global order. Okay. He called out libertarians saying they are the threat to global order. They are the threat to government involved in personal lives. He called it out. Okay, perfect. Now you have the World Economic Forum that invites Millet to the stage, to the event. And not only that, then you have Carl Schwab, the very person who says libertarianism is a global threat to the World Economic Forum and to these global institutions, is also then the person who welcomes Javier on stage to give this incredible speech that everybody is so in love with on the libertarian side and the classical liberal side. But Klaus Schwab calls him an enemy, and then he's the one welcoming him on stage. Like I find that a little odd. You don't usually see that where a global institution that's very government, corrupt, and political invites their enemy on stage after calling them the enemy, like as if it's nothing. So there's something weird about that dynamic because you almost never see that on a global stage.
Yeah,
It's
there's
rare you'll
something
ever
off.
see that. So that to me is a little odd. Two, it's this. Traditionally in the libertarian, and free market ecosystem, nobody really likes Zelensky from Ukraine because he's also extremely corrupt. He steals money, he lies, he wants to partake in the globalist system and everything. But at the same time, we know that, and there's a typical thing. You have Javier welcoming Zelensky to Ukraine and hugging him like they're besties. If you don't respect the globalist system, why are you bestie with someone who literally wants to be part of the globalist system and wants to feed into that globalist system and wants the West to kind of colonize all of Europe as well? So there's some of his behaviors are kind of odd. So in my mind, I have this like risk thesis that
Mhm.
says that he was purposely put there, or he's participating in this little theatrical game to purposely make libertarians look horrible while he destroys the Argentinian economy so that the government could come in and say, you see, you need us. Libertarianism is not the way because all they'll do is destroy the economy.
Hmm.
So that's a little bit of my place because it's weird.
Some people will say, you see, it's interesting because some people will say this is conspiracy, but I don't think that's conspiracy at all. And even if it is like conspiracy, what is conspiracy? Conspiracy is nothing else but thinking of any alternative.
Correct.
What if? That's what conspiracy
Correct.
is.
Correct.
And
I'm
people
just
think
trying to
like
be aware of my risk.
exactly.
What might come at me? Because at the same time is you have people that are so hopeful and excited, and then all of a sudden something happens, they're gonna be shit and all depressed again. Instead, be realistic. This is the first time we've ever seen this. It might not go the way we want it to. It might turn out disastrous because it's an experiment for the first time.
That's
Because
true.
who knows he's going to do it properly? He might make a disaster of the Argentinian economy in the process, not end up actually doing anything good for them in the long term. And then all he's going to have done is create an opportunity for the government to come in and then shit on libertarians.
I think you should write an article about this thesis and present your argument. It's a hypothesis.
Correct.
There's no way of,
But
of
it's
test. Yeah,
based on something tangible that
exactly.
like why would a libertarian be hugging Zelensky when he hates the global order and calls them communists and assholes and pieces of shit? So shouldn't Zelensky be one of those pieces of shit that you despise, that you say that you call the enemy, but then you're hugging him like he's your best friend? So
Right.
there's these dualities that in his behavior that don't really make sense to me. And
Yeah,
then the thing
man.
with Klaus Schwab, like
Yeah.
Javier should be the enemy of Klaus Schwab, and yet
And
here he
yet
is
they're
welcoming
and
him,
yes, they
inviting
and
him,
yet they're best buds.
and he's inviting him on stage.
Yeah.
Are you just setting us up to look like complete clowns on a global stage so this way you can argue why you want to be part of it rather than be against it and be part of the libertarian movement and all this stuff? Because if he called that as an enemy, he clearly has to have some sort of argument or
Yeah.
something, a game plan to kind of destroy the libertarian movement.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on here. It will be interesting to see how things evolve. But
Correct. I
what
agree.
is your prediction about Javier Milei in the next 2 to 3, 4 years? I think a term in Argentina is 4 years. How do you see his presidency doing?
I think that's going to be shaky as hell because the question becomes you might say you can promise things by reversing the trend. But the thing is, has he made his people aware that in the process of trying to remove the grasp of the state when the economy is so dependent on the state that once you start disconnecting that connection, there's going to be a lot of problems that are going to boil up. That if the culture and the people don't accept those burdens and those consequences and don't face them head on and instead run away from it, all he's going to do to his culture is further impede it and hurt it. So as he's slicing away the government out of its culture, he has to be in the process, be an example, be a leader, and educating his people into understanding what is about to happen. And if he doesn't do that well, I think he's going to wreak havoc in his culture. And I think, and a part of me thinks that is what could happen because I don't think he's going to be a good leader and educate his people in what is going to happen. Instead, he's going to make kind of like a theatrical show out of it and not actually be a leader. So I think there's going to be a lot of division in Argentina. I think there's going to be a lot more economic problems because of the fact that the people of Argentina, even though they support them, they don't understand what's coming their way because they don't
That's true.
understand economics.
That's true.
So, and most people don't. So, just because you might support this idea of a free market and getting rid of the government, if you don't understand what's about to hit you in the face and you're not ready for it, it's going to throw your entire life upside down. And then you get kind of like the spiral effect.
Absolutely.
So I think that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on this. Um, Before we go, I want you to talk about one last thing. This is more about writing because you're a
Yeah.
writer. Uh, what is your writing process? Because you are an example for people who love nonfiction and academic writing and don't think that they need all the academic credentials
Mhm.
required to make their work known and show their worth. So, can you share your experience as a writer? Like, what is your writing
Absolutely.
process and how you know that this is the right book to write and get it published?
So I feel like my process is a little different than most people, but I feel like it's a good one, especially when you want to dabble in theoretical stuff and dabble more in forward-looking processes. So Instagram for me is a great outlet because on Instagram I will post a lot of news, I will post a lot of things, and I oftentimes do a little thought piece or analysis above it. And it's a way for me to engage my mind on material in real time. And at the same time, it allows me to build an archive of information from myself and from what I post from other people in order to reflect on. And it's how I develop my ideas and day to day create connections in my brain and see patterns developing. And that's one thing. Two is whenever I have an idea or I have something I really want to write out, I don't necessarily care about the structure at the beginning. I just want to write it out and get it on paper and
Mhm.
write as much stuff as I can. I'll
Got
worry
it.
about the structure later because the most important thing in that moment, especially when I'm dealing with something that's primarily in my inside of my head, is if I don't let it out, I will lose that because
Yeah,
I don't know if I'll ever get those thoughts back
same.
because there's nowhere else to get it back. I can't go read something and then just be like, okay, I'm just going to use this piece of data and plug it in. No, no. I'm trying to construct a frame of thought in my brain. And if I don't put it down on paper, I lose it. So another thing I do is I just write a lot of my stuff out on paper. And then later on, I try to structure it and I try to merge it with other information to really make it sense. So if we take, for example, my first book to my second book, my first book was, I had the luxury in this, it's a luxury in the sense for a writer. I had curfews and lockdown, so I couldn't leave my house, right? So I didn't have anything else to do really other than just be at home all day. So I got to be in a bubble and just write, 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 write. But obviously nowadays you don't necessarily have that luxury anymore because you actually can step out of your house now in the normal sense. So my second book is a better example for me, which took me a little more of about a year of process of writing a lot of thoughts on paper. And it wasn't just the writing for me that was important, it was also the discussions I had around the thoughts I was having. So I would purposely put myself in positions where I would throw out my thoughts at people and people that I knew that I can engage with and people that like this type of thinking and discussion. And I would engage with them to see what it is they're thinking and how they would respond to the thoughts that I was having, because it allows me to shape and evolve my thinking and my thought process in order to see is how do I better bring them in to what I'm thinking. Is it receptive? Is it not receptive? Is it because they're throwing something relevant, or is it just because they're not understanding it, or is it because they have some sort of counter thought to that? So my process is really just write everything out. Don't worry about structure. Just write, 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 write. Collect all your thought process and write it all out. Have a shit ton of discussions around the material you're developing because it'll allow you to have different perspectives on what it is you're building out. And it'll also help you see where you need to evolve or reshape your thinking in order to make it more receptive to the marketplace. And then after that, it's a matter of just pure will and passion to get up and freaking reread and write it all because I know how long and tedious it can be to reread and reread and restructure and reread and rewrite everything. So And I think that by seeing you just write snippets of information here and there and just let it build up, inspires you to want to make something of it after.
Yeah,
So that's kind of my process.
got it. And because yeah, the reason why I was asking that is because some people really want to write,
Hmm.
but they don't know where to start and how to start.
Agreed.
And that's one thing. And the second is the struggle to keep up.
Yeah.
I used to have that struggle too. I
Hmm.
started writing a long time ago. I started writing when I was 16 or 17.
Hmm.
I started, but I would not finish it
Hmm.
until, but that was because I did not create a system where, like, okay, today I'm writing for 2 to 4. Tomorrow I'm writing for 4 to 6. And the day after that, I'm writing from 10 to 12 and so on and so forth.
Right.
And then within those 2 hours of writing, I'm going to write X amount of chapters or X amount of words or X amount of pages. Is it also how you proceed when this is now we're
Hmm.
talking after putting your
Correct.
thoughts on paper. Now we're
Yes.
talking about the structure.
So once, because I feel at the beginning, like for my first book, it was very, very heavily driven by passion. I was so obsessed with my first project that I didn't really need some sort of structure
Yeah.
because my body, my mind was such in a state of mind that all I wanted to do was write, 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 write because I had everything else going on in the world that was locked down and on that I was in that zone. But the
Mm.
moment you take away those constraints and now you're more flexible and free to do things, for my second book, for example, I did find myself in a position where because it was longer, because it was taking more time, because it was more tedious, I had to develop a little bit of structure. Say, look, today between these hours, I'm just going to sit, read, put some classical music on, relax. Because if I don't do this, I'm just going to end up not writing because I know it gets tedious and difficult, especially as you near the end of the project and you've written all out, you structured it all out. Now you have to reread it and then you have to reread it. So if you don't put that structure in, I feel like you're just gonna like it's getting out of bed. You're just gonna want to stay in bed and not get out. And that
Yeah,
that kind of principle will apply with your book. You're just never gonna finish it because it gets tedious and annoying. I gotta reread it and re-edit and do this and do that. So once you the structure is what's going to allow you to continue beyond the passion
got it.
because the
Um,
passion will get you at the beginning, but it won't hold you permanently.
what is your advice then for an inspiring author, someone who wants to get published eventually? What is the one single advice you will give to that guy who has that project and he wants to get started?
Keep a thought journal, not about relationships, but keep a journal where thoughts you have about the world, things you question about the world, things that you believe are answers to questions you have, put it out, let your ideas flow. I think people need to build kind of find this conscious place within themselves to be able to kind of open up this valve of thought in their brain and just let it flow onto paper. Let it out because the more you start seeing all the ideas you have and all the stuff you're putting on a paper, the more you can kind of tap into it and kind of visualize it more and more into your brain. But if you all you do is keep it in your head, you never have the chance to develop on an idea, to build out an idea. So it's harder to visualize it. By writing it out and just letting it out on paper, you make better sense of what it is you're seeing in your brain. So I think the only thing I would say truly, and I think that's like I suggest to one of my friends, he's writing a book now. So it's a little more fiction. It's more fiction, but a reverse of a dystopian story where he's trying to apply free market philosophies to a story where people that are from a dystopian place can't blend in with a free market culture. So he's giving a different story. And my thing to him was just write.
Just right.
Don't be so fixated on the story. Don't be so fixated on the structure. Don't be so fixated on the editing. Just let your ideas out on paper, write it, and just let it flow. Make sense of it after. Because
Yeah.
if you try to do that at the beginning, you're going to be in you're always
Yeah.
stopping yourself from letting ideas flow.
Yeah.
Just let the ideas flow, then make sense of it after.
I absolutely I am I absolutely agree with you. You're absolutely right. I do the same too. I start first with the ideas and then I focus on the structure after. Because yes, if you prioritize the structure, you're putting roadblocks,
Correct.
or like a writer block, as we call it in the
Correct.
writing
Correct.
community.
Correct.
You're putting
Exactly.
right block.
It's not as fun too at the beginning, you know. You
No,
want
yeah,
you want the beginning process of writing to be fun. So
yeah,
if all it is just me getting to indulge my ideas and my thoughts, I have a blast doing that. So let me just do
absolutely.
that. The structuring part is where it's more tedious and annoying.
Yeah,
That has to come after, because if
absolutely.
you need something to inspire you to want to go do that. So let
Yeah,
all the development of your ideas be the inspiring point to then say, okay, well, I did all this work. Now I have to structure it, because or
yeah,
else I'm putting all this work to waste.
yeah, that's true. Well, Nicholas, thank you very much for
Of
your
course.
sharp insights on this podcast. Thank you for accepting to share your
Of
views with us.
course.
It was amazing. Where
Always
can
a
we find
blast.
you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Nick Tartaglia, NIC. You can also find me through my podcast at NewGen Mindset Pod. You can find more of my work on our website at www.newgenmindset.com. And on LinkedIn and on Twitter, I'm at Imperium_mind.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much for everything. And
Obviously.
guys, we will see you guys next time.